Uhuru Sasa, which means freedom now in Kiswahili. You're listening to Diasporic music, and we just completed we were listening to Black Uhuru, Puma Jones out of South Carolina, Ducky Simpson, and Junior Reed, a great singer, very energetic. You ever see Junior Reed? Have you ever seen Junior Reed? He's unbelievable. You'll get tired just watching him perform. We're getting ready to speak to Elle Jones. She is a poet, a journalist, professor, and activist living in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And she was a poet laureate of Halifax, Nova Scotia from 2013 to 2015. And she's been on these airwaves many times. And we would like to welcome Elle Jones back to Black Power 96. And how are you doing, my sister?
I'm good. Thank you for having me back.
Oh, Melinda, you want to kick off the show?
Yeah, I wanted to, we haven't had you on since I believe it was August. And there's lots have been going on. We have a new prime minister. and things. So yeah, I wanted to get your take of, current situation in this country that we call so-called Canada.
Yeah. So we're at an interesting time. First of all, the NDP is now entering a leadership race. So that's our supposed left-wing party, but the NDP has not been left in a long time. They're now maybe center. So they got decimated in the last election. So for those who don't know, there's the Liberals and Conservatives. So the so-called right-wing party, and the Liberals are so-called centrist party, and then the NDP and Greens are also called left parties. And then there's the Bloc Québécois, which is exclusively in Quebec. But the NDP, increasingly, obviously, as we all see from the Democratic Party, is moving right. So they got wiped out in the last election. They don't even have official party status. The leader had to resign. So they're in the middle of a leadership race right now, which is interesting because I think it tells us a lot about where the current political landscape is. Obviously, for example, in terms of Palestine, in terms of foreign policy, what even on the left is speakable and unspeakable. So that's taking place right now. They're just starting the leadership debates. Sorry, go ahead.
Elle, I don't want to cut you, but could you explain the fact that the leader of the NDP was a Sikh? Do you think that had anything to do with Jagmeet Singh because he was a Sikh?
Yeah, I mean, when he was first running, so when he was elected leader, and then was first running for office and then leading the party. I mean, even during that campaign, we saw all these incidents of like massive racism towards him. Quebec, for example, has a law that bans religious symbols, which is really an anti-hijab, anti-Muslim law. And he's a Sikh man who wears a turban. And so he was the only leader willing to come out and basically defend the right of religious dress. And on that campaign trail during that election, this would have been in, I don't remember, like 2020, no, before then. I don't know. I don't remember exactly anymore. But there was like numerous people showing up at his events and like yelling racist stuff at him and calling him un-Canadian, saying he should take the rag off his head, that kind of stuff. And he took this tack of really like meeting them with love and being like, we need to love these people, and obviously that hasn't been or wasn't extremely effective. I think it was a combination of, obviously, I don't think he had the same sort of party support as a Sikh man, but I think also perhaps because he felt vulnerable, he was like running towards the Liberals. So they actually struck a deal with the Liberals last term that they wouldn't vote against the Liberals, so they would not dissolve the government. They wouldn't go along when the Conservatives were trying to force an election. And in return, we were supposed to get stuff like concessions to the NDP. In practice, what it meant is we lost all criticism from the left in Parliament. So we had criticism from the Conservatives, and then the NDP had basically signed on to agree and go with the Liberals. And the result of that, we saw in the last leadership debates, this election, which was run in the context of Trump, right? So this is right when Trump was talking about invading Canada and the 51st state, obviously threatening tariffs, which he's since put in. And so Carney, who is the Liberal guy, basically managed to close this big gap that the Conservatives have opened by seeming at the time like a patriotic Canadian who wouldn't follow Trump. So we had this thing like elbows up. But the point is that in the name of like defending Canada, if you looked on the leadership stage when they're having those debates, everybody was agreed on like more war. Everybody was talking about like more prisons, more pipelines, more border security. So we now have a so-called liberal prime minister. See, I said president because he's just like Trump. A liberal prime minister who is hiring more RCMP officers. So that's our federal police, who is fortifying the border with more officers. They have not let anyone in from Gaza. We've let in something like less than 1,000, 2,000 people from Gaza, like family members of people in Canada. They've actually bulldozed Indigenous consent around things like resource extraction projects and pipelines. So they've weakened those laws under the name of Canadian economic security. They're talking about giving more money to NATO, so increasing our military budget. So these are all Conservative priorities. So what we're seeing is a Liberal government that's delivering the Conservatives' priorities to them, and an NDP that was completely toothless because they basically signed up to agree with them. So then they couldn't even attack them from the left. And I think we're seeing this all over the world, right? The destruction of any kind of left discourse, the so-called center-left parties moving hard right, the hard right parties moving into authoritarian fascism, and then, all of this being blamed on the left. So we're seeing a similar thing with the NDP and the Liberal Party as well here.
You're listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. We're speaking with Del Jones.
Sorry, you can hear the children in the background. I'm going to try and step into another hallway. I'm at a Palestinian kids talent show right now. Sorry?
Yeah, it's
no,
okay.
It sounds pretty clear to me. I couldn't hear anything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So my question is, have you looked at the upcoming candidates for the leadership race in the NDP?
Yeah, so I mean, the so-called frontrunner is Heather McPherson, who's one of the 7 remaining members of the NDP. She's reasonable on Palestine, and has been one of the few people getting up in Parliament and like asking questions. But she's actually a pro-oil, otherwise fairly conservative person. So she's a supposed frontrunner because she's actually in office right now as opposed to basically anyone else. But again, I mean, while I'll give her credit for being at least somewhat decent on Palestine, not great, but reasonable, on everything else, like resource extraction, economic policy, she is, again, basically a liberal at best. Then Avi Lewis, you may remember Stephen Lewis, who was a Canadian ambassador for a long time. It's his son. So he's another one of the front runners, allegedly. Yves Engler is running from the left, but he has not actually formally registered for the race yet. So he's running right now outside the campaign because he says this is a strategy to prevent the NDP from banning him from running, because they obviously have a history of gatekeeping campaigns from the left. So his plan is to sort of raise the money, run outside, and then enter the leadership race at the last moment. Whether or not that's effective strategy, I don't know. But as a result, he's not able to participate in the big debates. But he has a long history of socialist activism, anti-war activism. He's written a number of books, 13 books, specifically dealing with Canada's foreign policy. So he's strong there. But it's a controversial campaign because he has not actually registered at this point, and there's been a lot of debate about that. And then there's Rob Ashton, who's a Labour leader. So that was exciting a lot of people, a genuinely working class voice, except for he came out and said he was considering repealing the tanker ban, which would obviously allow, again, more oil and more development and environmental destruction. And then Tennille, I forget her last name, she just entered. So yeah, I don't know how, we'll see how this plays out. But I guess some of the debate is the usual debate on the left between, the sort of middle class urban leftists and then the working class, and how the NDP brings those together.
Listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. In terms of how is the people in your circles and in the area that you live in, who are people favoring in Halifax, Nova Scotia?
I don't know. I don't know if people are there yet. Obviously, in the circles I'm at, one reason why I'll have to cut this short in a minute is I'm actually at a Palestine event right now. And obviously, I think for a lot of people, that's a zero-sum issue. Like, either you're against genocide or you're not, and all issues flow from that. We live in a port town in Halifax, so one of the campaigns here is obviously to stop shipments to Israel, get the unions to stop handling hot cargo, so anything bound towards Israel. Which is a labor-based campaign from Labor for Palestine. We had the Davis Cup played here, which was a tennis match being played against Israel that we were heavily, trying to get shut down. So there's a number of protests around that. And obviously over these last 2 years, there's been a strong coalition of those who have actual leftist principles and are against war and genocide and recognize Israel as a settler colonial colony. That have pointed out that if you cannot stand against genocide, we can't trust your principles and anything else. So I think for a lot of people, Palestine is the litmus test. But I don't know outside of that. I don't think people are having too many discussions. It's sort of early days yet. Like the deadline for entry into the race is January. So the race is just picking up. But I think a lot of people are disinvested for obvious reasons from traditional party politics because no matter what people have done, no matter what politicians we've written, the genocide has continued for 2 years. And that, I think, shows the exact failure of party politics, and whether it's from the left, the right, whoever, to actually deal with any serious issues. So I think most people are, to be honest, fed up with all of this and are investing their energies more in protest, in boycott, in labor movements that stand against genocide. All those activities that people are taking on, I think, is more important to people right now than, a leadership race within a capitalist party.
Well, as H. Rap Brown or Imam Jamil Al-Amin might say, I have a bit of advice for the left. That advice, don't get left. That sounds like the NDP.
Well, I mean, we're seeing this. I don't know, a lot of people are talking about the review of Karine St. Pierre's book. So the spokesperson for Biden, a Black woman, Haitian woman, right? So should know better. A queer Haitian woman who was Biden's spokesperson. And she just released the book. I forget what it's called, some nonsense. Independent, that's what it's called. And it just got massacred in the pages of the Washington Post. And they pointed out that, despite getting up at the podium and backing a genocide for 2 years, despite the Democrats' total failure to deliver any policies to people, their inability to stand up to Trump, she says the only thing that she's mad about for the Democrats was not allowing Biden to run. And then she gave an interview on MSNBC, and they asked her basically, do you regret getting up at the podium for 2 years and defending Biden's genocide? And she was like, no, I don't regret anything. So that's the state of the bourgeois Black left as well, right? So careerist that you can stand up and actually support the fact that not even express any shame about standing at that podium in the name of, and brought up her own identity to support that, you know what I mean? And then, but it also shows the complete failure of the Democrats to be any kind of reasonable force, that's why they're completely ineffectual. I think we're seeing the same thing in Canada with the Liberals. We don't have any parties willing to take solid working class stances, solid anti-war stances, solid stances against foreign intervention, whether that be in Venezuela. And I mean, as we know too, my family's from Trinidad, we know recently 2 Trinidadians were bombed, when the U.S. was massacring so-called drug dealers, which is actually innocent Venezuelans with no trial. And that included Trinidadians. Who's pushing back on that?
Yep, that's right. And
I also say that, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say one more thing, but go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just also the litmus test is also Haiti, because I kind of disengaged from any party politics, especially with the NDP, because they never spoke out against the never-ending interventions that we have in Haiti. So so not only Gaza, but it's also Haiti.
Or anything war making, like I said, when you watch the debate, they were competing over who would be the most pro-pipeline, who was the most pro-police, who was the most pro-prison. I think at one point, Agmeet Singh actually said, of course we all want to see bad people in prison. It's okay, so now we've just conceded the whole ground on policing and prisons, right? You're not going to push back on that tough on crime nonsense, But I was going to say that we talked a bit about this a bit last time, how there's this kind of like what I think is a CIA op being run on Black people, where people are saying Gaza isn't our concern, let them fight it out, this isn't Black people's business. What have we seen since but the National Guard coming into now the blackest cities, DC and Chicago, right? ICE being deployed in Chicago right now. Then, of course, foreign policy that's also murdering Black people in the ocean, like people from Trinidad, including in the Caribbean. So I just want to point out that, everybody that said Black people should sit this one out because it was nothing to do with us. Of course it was to do with us, because when you have a murderous foreign policy based on policing and surveillance and authoritarian fascism, it's always about Black people, and it's always going to come back to us, right? So I think a lot of people, again, wanted to separate out Palestine from also things like our ongoing anti-Black policies on Haiti, our ongoing regime change wars in like Venezuela, Bolivia, our behavior in the Middle East, all of which is connected, but Black people wanted to say, had nothing to do with us. Well, now we see the fruits of that, right?
Well, we need to follow our leadership like Rocky Jones and Paul Robeson, Claudia Jones, and people like that. And associate ourselves from the leadership of the FBA crowd, the FBA crowd. Those are the people that are promoting what I call Katangaism. They sound just like Moise Tshombe in the Congo. They're out of touch with reality. And
it's a similar version of this identity politics. The same way as Karine St. Pierre can get up and be like, well, as a queer Black woman, and like we're back, as if we're back in 2008 with Obama, like, oh, it's so amazing to have a Black president. Like we learned that lesson with Obama if we didn't before. And now, we're like 20 years past that, and people still trying to talk about that. Well, the version of that, it's the same thing. It's just another version of that. Like your identity is like, let's debate our identity. Let's debate whether we call ourselves Black or African. Let's debate, like while our people are being murdered and while, our taxes are being put into weaponry and like being sent to support occupation. And then, of course, that rebounds back on Black people because we know they always want to discipline and control us. And of course, all those weapons and policing that come out of Israel and all the containment tactics from Israel and all the media tactics around, brazen lying and unaccountability, of course, that's also going to impact Black people. So I think it was always ridiculous that people thought that due to their identity as, FBA or an ADOS, that they could separate themselves from that. And now we see the result because, of course, Trump has, and it's not even turned to, it was always part of Trump. But, like people who wanted to say ICE had nothing to do with Black people, now ICE is in Chicago. So good job with that,
Well, I was taught years ago from Muhammad Ahmed, this quote was, unite the many to divide the few. And I it's always been not always, I'll be lying, but, I came to that position decades ago, and that just makes sense.
Exactly.
Unite the many to divide the few. It's like we need to, George Jackson had a similar position. We need to, anybody that's on that it was George Jackson's position. He had a quote about a real talked about when they were in prison. In the prison, they would be trying to unite with the white prisoners, and he would basically say if the white prisoners were dumb enough to fight against them, he would basically say, okay, should be united in here because we're all in prison together. And he was able to survive. I mean, he was able to get quite a few. At one point they had support, across the board.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's always been the role of like capitalist identity politics, right? Is to not to actually obviously support us in pride and liberation, but to divide us from each other. And I mean, they're doing this forever. So it's sad to see that people are falling for this in these online ops as well. I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes because we're off break here, but I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to ask me.
No, we can bring you back in a couple of weeks and have, when you have more time.
The other thing I want to talk about is the Black support in the Black church for Zionism. I think there's a big conversation about that, Black Zionists. And so the failure of the Black church now to take a stance on justice, and over decades what we've seen is the radical stance of the Black church that has been tied to radical social, like Black liberation, has been gutted out of the church in favor of prosperity gospel and like mega churches and this nonsense. And we see the result now where we actually have Black people supporting Zionism through this like warped historical Christian evangelical view and not supporting Palestine, because literally the Black church also doesn't even support Black liberation movements anymore. So I'm sure there's a longer conversation about that we could have.
We need to about my pastor, the late great James Cone. Yeah, he was a liberation theologist to the bone. Yeah, he was great, and he had a great book, Malcolm and Martin. But yeah, everybody listening to the sound of my voice should go Google James Cone. He was a great liberation theologist.
Yeah, I attend this online meeting in Jerusalem, so Sabeel. It's online from Jerusalem, and they're Palestinian liberation theologists who take the inspiration from Black liberation theology. But sadly, I can get that from Jerusalem, and I can't really get that in my own community, right? Like in the Black church. And then when you go to the Black church, you have people who actually support Zionism in Israel. It's bizarre. So I think it's another example of the state of Black politics right now, like how taken over we were by neoliberalism and have been by Obamaism. And we see our inability now to defend ourselves when we have, again, like ICE in our communities, authoritarian and fascism, because our political capital and organizing has been so eroded.
Yep. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Yeah.
You're breaking up, so maybe we should hold it there because I also can't hear you.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Good to talk to you. Okay, bye.
And we have been speaking with L. Jones out of Halifax, Nova Scotia. And let me see, Melinda, what time is it now?
It is 2:56, but why don't we go back to our track that we had to cut short? No problem.
Let's go back to Michael Rose. Let's go back to
Black Uhuru, yeah.
And Black Uhuru. Yeah, okay.
In the morning as I rise, put on my truck so can exercise. Me want to fit, me want to fit. Walk on the road, me not trouble no one, me not eat no steak, me not eat no ham. Grandma grow me as a vegetarian, music is my occupation. Going at the field for dig some yam, pick some can use it, make a shaman. School for the come and get it for them. Start to sing no what a bam bam. No guy now come cut tight throat, take tight chain and go pop big sport. Woman and woman gonna stick no foot, laugh and take that fit big took. Look how me big, look how me strong. Say me more, say it down. Hey, you get tight, you have to fit, you have to fit. To get tight, you have to fit. Fit. To hit the chart, you got to smart. To hit the chart, you got to smart. In the morning as I rise, put on my truck so can exercise. Me want to fit, me want to fit. Want to fit, me want to fit. Look how me big, look how me strong. Say me most live loving. Ewo. Look how me big, look how me strong. Me a vegetarian. Galang. Walk on the road, me not chop no one. Me not eat no steak, me not eat no ham. Grandma give me as a vegetarian. Music is my occupation. Use my money buy food and place. Now use my money buy me a freebies. Don't want my pants strap off from my waist. No one feel I like me out of space. No man now come cut my throat. Take my chin and go pop big sport. Woman gonna stick no foot. Laugh and take that big joke. Put in the field to go dig some yam. Dig some can use it, make a shaman. School till they come and get it for them. Started to sing oh what a bam bam. Look how me big, look how me strong. Tell me more, still laughing. Ewo. Look how me big, look how me strong. Me a vegetarian.